Hello, friends. Welcome back to another post from controlautomaticoducasayan.com.
My name is Sergio Castano, and today we're going to continue with our Matlab course for beginners.
In this video, we're going to learn about Matlab's built-in functions and how to use them.
If you haven't watched all the videos in our Matlab for beginners course yet, here's a link with all the videos so you can start watching from the very beginning.
So let's get started. Now, let's take a look at the built-in functions that Matlab offers. Most engineering problems require advanced calculations to be solved.
Matlab provides us with an extensive library of mathematical functions for trigonometry, logarithms, statistical analysis, and more.
That's why we've already mentioned several times that this software is essential in the field of engineering, because thanks to it, we'll be able to perform very complex calculations. The big advantage in Matlab is that these functions can perform calculations on both scalars and matrices. So, this is a major advantage that we'll see in a moment. But how are these functions defined? Let's take the square root function as an example. So, if I have this calculation here where I have my b, and in b I'm going to store the result of the square root of x. Let's see how functions are structured in Matlab, even though we've already been working with them a bit throughout this course.
So, in Matlab, we would simply write the equals sqrt, parentheses x. That's how we would use the square root function.
Let's see what this function has.
This function has an output parameter, which in this case is b. The result of the operation will be stored in the output parameter. The function has a name. In this case it's called sqrt, and it also has an input parameter.
That's what the function needs in order to perform the calculation. In this case, this function takes an input parameter x, which will be a number whose square root will be calculated.
As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, this x can be a scalar, meaning it can be a single number, like taking the square root of 16, for example, or it can also be a matrix or a vector, where it will take the square root of each element in the vector, 4, 9, 25, and 12.
So, if we're here in Matlab, we can define, for example, x equals. We define our vector x, and in b, we simply calculate the square root of each element in that vector.
However, we can also note that in Matlab, we can have more than one input parameter, like for example in the rem function, which calculates the remainder between a and b. We see that this function has two input parameters, a and b, and also, there are functions where we can have, two output parameters.
In this case, the size function, which is a function that calculates the size of a matrix or vector, will have two output parameters.
In this case, the output parameters are x and y. Here, then, d must be a matrix or a vector.
And here, then, x will tell me the number of rows and y the number of columns that this matrix D has. But also, I could think of writing it as f equals size of D, and in f, it will give me the result as a vector with the number of rows and columns. Let's take a look at this in Matlab. First, we define our vector D. We have our matrix D, and if we say, we call the size function, and we see that it has two input parameters, where x tells me that vector D has two rows and y tells me it has three columns. Or we could also just call it an f, and f will come out as a vector, telling me it has two rows and three columns. And similarly, the rem function is simply c equals rem, which gives me the remainder of the function. So I want you to, hey, what's the remainder when you divide 3 by 2? It tells me that the remainder is 1. In Matlab, we can also take advantage of nested functions, meaning I can take a function and call another function within its input parameters. Let's see how it's done.
As an example of these nested functions, let's suppose we need to find the square root of the sign of any number x. So, as we can see here, we're using two functions.
In Matlab, we would write it as b equals sqrt, which is a function, and inside the parentheses we're calling the other function, which is the trigonometric sine function, sine of x. So, we need to be very careful with the use of parentheses so that we don't get a syntax error or a calculation error.
So, we have to be careful when working with nested functions. Or we could also simply create a variable a where we store the sign of x, and in b we just calculate the square root of a. So, let's see how to do this in Matlab. Let's say that x equals 15, and in b we're going to store the square root. We open and close parentheses. It's always good practice to do this, and then we type sign, open and close parentheses, and here we put x. So, the result is 0.8064. Well, friends, that's all for today's video. We've now learned how to use Matlab's built-in functions.
We're going to start a video series to look at several of the built-in functions that the software offers.
Here we just gave a basic overview of what we're going to find in our software. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share this video, and we'll see you in the next entry of Matlab for beginners. Take care. See you later.
You can follow me on my social media, subscribe to my channel by clicking on my photo and turning on the notification bell, and don't forget to watch the next video.